Phaedra Shaltanis. She is the department chair of our Humanities program. As I said, she is a seasoned classical educator, 20 years of experience in classical tradition. Her experience also includes home educating her 4 children, teaching in private schools, creating classical curriculum, and serving as a leader in various programs, mentoring parents and other teachers in classical education. Phaedra cherishes conversations built on God's truth and strives to engage others through discourse, particularly in the areas of literature and history. She hopes to encourage her students toward a stronger ardor for language as they seek after God and treasure their membership in Christ's kingdom. And I just found out recently that she's an artist. So she has all these lovely hidden talents. So with that, Phaedra, welcome. I hand it to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those kind words. For all the years that I've taught in schools, I want to say that this has been my favorite experience. And I want to share some reasons why I love Scholé Academy and why I hope you give it a chance, and hopefully you can be blessed in similar ways. First, look at these wonderful students who have given their Friday afternoon to be with us, and I thank you very much for being here. The students make this teaching so wonderful. Also, ironically, the thing that I first was hesitant about, the online venue, is the thing that has become the best aspect of it in many ways, because we are not geographically bound. And so students can find the classes that they want to take and truly express their interest in them. So student body is wonderful, but also the idea of sitting at leisure to discuss great, enduring, beautiful ideas founded in scripture and through the biblical worldview is a tremendous blessing. And we get to do that in humanities. We really get to read the finest works, if you will, the ones who have lasted for thousands of years. And we look at historical events through both the literature aspect and through the Christian worldview. So what can I say about the humanities program? It begins very young with just reading. Right? Reading books and talking about them. And throughout the early stages that we have through Scholé, I'm not sure as much about the early levels, but reading is a big part of our time together as home educators, as you know. By the time we get to middle and high school, the foundation has sort of been laid for discourse and for content area. So we start piling on layers. We start looking more deeply into ideas of freedom and liberty and justice and truth. We start re-examining stories that we heard when we were younger, and now we look at them with a much more critical eye, and we sort of look at ourselves as well. So humanities, really it's the study of human beings, the expressions of human nature and character, and they're all what we try to be united in kind of the great conversation, which is what joins all of us together here. So I would like to just launch into one of my favorite topics of the year. We just finished a study on the French Revolution and in history and literature. The accompanying book was A Tale of Two Cities. The literature and history for upper school, middle as well, middle and upper, is a block. It is great to take both classes together because they really enhance each other, providing a pretty robust and full examination. So our students today are going to be discussing some of the ideas that have really stuck with us through this study of the French Revolution. And we are going to begin with a portion of a psalm. It's Psalm 146, verses 7 to 9. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the sojourners. He upholds the widow and the fatherless, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. The Lord sets the prisoners free. When we think about prisoners, we often think about punishment, which is related to the idea of justice. So I'm going to ask Salem, who is also in rhetoric with me. Salem, what do you think about how would you define justice, and where do we see it fairly or unfairly represented throughout history?
I would probably define justice as people getting what they deserve. Um, and there's lots of places where justice is executed, but the one that comes to mind that's probably like the best example of people receiving justice is when the Lord burned Sodom and Gomorrah to the ground because of their sins. Now, personally, I kind of have a harsh, um, to me, justice is kind of harsh. Um, and that's where man to man justice can sometimes be a little shady because we're all sinners. And as soon as a sinner gives a sinner what they deserve, it can become a little flawed. Like Xerxes whipped a river because the river did not do what he wanted it to do. But then there are also men in history that truly strive to provide good justice, like Hammurabi kind of devoted part of his life to writing up codes to provide the most amount of justice. It was flawed, nobody can deny that, but he tried his best. And to me, that's kind of what justice is. But then a more modern sense of justice would be the poor and those who have been mistreated, being raised up and given back what has been taken from them.
The poor and those who have been mistreated. Well, we know a lot about that from the French Revolution, don't we? Does anyone else have another comment on justice? Salem did a great job. Thank you, Salem. Anyone want to comment or expound on that? Sophia?
In Plato's Republic, a lot of different definitions of justice are propounded, but Socrates says that justice in its own nature is what is best for the individual soul in its own nature. So looking at it from that viewpoint, kind of thinking about what can I do how can I be just towards another person? What is going to help my soul and what is going to help their soul? Looking at it as that's going to be the most just thing to do.
Really great. Thanks for bringing Plato into this. It makes me wonder if there is then an objective justice, which of course we know with Christian, our faith, of course, God is the ultimate, the giver of the law. But then what happens when that objective rule is not observed? But before we get to that, Jack, please.
For another more modern example of justice, I would say a lot of the constitutional amendments really represent justice. In that case, it's not justice in the sense of someone receiving their due and being punished, but it's people. A lot of the constitution amendments, like the freedom to, like the right to vote for African Americans and women, that's people receiving their due, and as in receiving liberties that they deserve. I would say that's another example of a just situation.
Great. So, what is the Bill of Rights outlines? I know this is not an American government or American history, but what is one of the most important foundational principles of human rights and justice? Amelia.
So I was reading through the Bill of Rights for History the other day, and it was interesting because a difference that it had from the French Declaration of the Rights of Man was that our rights are God-given. So why our rights are even important is because they come from a good creator. So I found that to be just like a very fundamental thing about rights, is they matter only in their relation to being given by God.
Beautiful. Right. We hold these truths to be self-evident that, who can finish that? Salem?
All men are created equal.
Great. Okay. So we are beginning with that premise. We understand that. But sadly, throughout history, not everyone did. So let's talk about the French Revolution, shall we? What were some examples of injustice that led to the French Revolution? And they went on for a long time before the French Revolution even started. What can you remember, Bryn?
Well, sort of the beginning of it was that the monarchy were the people who chose to fight with England for parts of the Americas. And so it's just interesting because they lost all their money almost in that war and other wars leading up to the French Revolution, which made them want to tax the third estate even more. And so the Third Estate never got a say in any of it. They weren't the ones who lost France's money. The monarchy was, and the monarchy still taxed them.
That's so true. And Bryn or anyone else really, would you like to explain, just as a reminder to us, what the Estates General were, and especially the Third Estate? Jack?
I believe that prior to the French Revolution, French society was divided into three classes, the three estates. The first estate was the higher clergy, the second was the aristocracy and the nobility, and the third was everything from basic serfs and peasants to lawyers and shopkeepers, so essentially the middle to lower classes of the country.
Right. And how was the power distributed? Noah?
97% of the population were of the common people, and the other 3% were of the other two classes. The biggest problem was that the other two classes were given the exact same power as the third class. So if they could overrule the third class whenever they wanted, and since the monarchs and the clergy were usually pretty combined, they usually had the power to say whatever they wanted.
Mm-hmm. And so those two first classes, they had some special privileges, if you recall. Do you remember what they might be, Emma?
Yeah, one of the injustices was definitely that they were exempt from taxes and stuff. So the 97% of the majority of the common people of France had to pay taxes, and they were just they were the only ones paying the taxes for all of the decisions that France made.
Exactly. So we have the injustice of the burden of the funds, I suppose, if you will, falling on the people who made the least amount of money and who really didn't have much to begin with. What did that look like for the average French person right up against the time of 1789? What were some of the big things that, I guess maybe even the biggest issue for the common people? Noah.
So food was the biggest problem. Bread was what they ate almost all the time, and so 80% or 90% of their wages went to buying bread. So that other 10%, they were taxed of. They had no other thing they could buy, and since there was grain shortages, the wheat kept on rising and rising, which meant the bread became more and more expensive, and that is one of the biggest causes of the French Revolution.
Right, exactly. So we have all these people and these mothers who are trying to feed their families, and they have very little money, and whatever they do have, they can barely get any bread because A, there were famines and shortages, but also the price of bread was raised quite high, right? So what were they to do? What could they do? Did they just say, well, we're powerless and that's the way it is? Let's look at the slogan of the French Revolution for our answers. What is the slogan? You can say it in English if you like. You don't have to say it in French. Amelia.
Liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Great, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Especially at this point, equality so that all families can feed their children. Women started becoming pretty important here at this time. Right. And so women were very much responsible in two things we talked about in July 14th, 1789, and then in October. So what is the first event, kind of the start of the French Revolution? Jack.
On July 13th, 1789, I believe 50,000 people from Paris stormed the Bastille in order to gain the weapons that were stored inside there by the monarchy. And in addition, they also freed the prisoners, and there were 7 prisoners there, so they executed the governor and 7 guards in retribution.
Excuse me, very good. So they didn't storm the Bastille to free these massive amounts of prisoners at all. Isn't that ironic? Now, King Louis the 16th didn't think this was such a big deal. So was the storming of the Bastille effective? Did it bring about a change? Bryn?
Well, yeah, like they said, the reason for the storming was for the weapons, not for the people inside, because there was so much stored up in it. And it was also just like a symbol, because other than Versailles, that was basically the main symbol of power for the monarchy, because it was such a huge historical building. And so in doing that, it sort of just inspired the rest of the revolution.
Right. Yep. Amelia.
And adding on to that, like King Louis's response of basic failure to address what had happened, I think was setting, like, he just totally underestimated what the people were capable of. And I think they saw that and they were like, okay, so how much can we get away with here? And because there was no retribution for that, I think that also spurred a lot of like hope about what they could actually accomplish.
Good point there. Good point there. So what did the French Revolution accomplish? You don't have to mention everything, maybe just one or two things. Sophia?
Basically, they were trying to get rid of the aristocracy, like that whole system. They wanted a complete change in like how the country was run and where the power came from. And so instead of having these classes where it was like the tiny 3% up top had all the power and the authority, they wanted it to be more evenly spread.
And it did work for a while, for sure. We're not finished with our study, of course. I mean, history is an ongoing, always keep learning and seeing connections, but there were some very positive changes. But the justice scenario, we need to look at that a little bit more carefully. Okay, we can all agree that there was great injustice. The aristocrats really abused their power, the clergy abused their power, and the people suffered. But there are different kinds of justice and reclaiming of justice, and this is where A Tale of Two Cities comes in. Can someone remember one of the examples of how the aristocrats, and maybe don't give the big example at the end of the book, but maybe one of the examples when the Marquis, kind of how did he demonstrate injustice to people? Noah?
A woman had lost her husband not far from where the Marquis was in his carriage driving, and she simply asked him, because he put a tombstone at the head of the grave, and he said no. And she had lost her husband. She was asking for nothing else, no money, nothing. She only wanted a tombstone. She was a weak woman, so she could not do it herself. And he was just like, no, I'm not doing anything for you. And he just went on with his own business.
Right, and that husband had served France. He had given his livelihood to the country. Jack, another example?
In addition, just earlier on that same trip that Noah just mentioned, his carriage had actually run over a small child in Paris, and he essentially stops annoyed that there is some sort of delay in the schedule. Well, they tell him what's happened, and he just tosses a few coins into the crowd as a means of payment and tries to ride away. He again, he's paying for damaged goods essentially.
Right. Oh, right. And how painful. So clearly there's not this all men are created equal idea in France at this time. Well, let's make this partly fictional, shall we? We know, what do we know about Charles Dickens and A Tale of Two Cities in terms of his historical accuracy? Is it all true? Is it mostly true? Is none of it true? Where do we go with historical fiction? What do you remember? Amelia.
I believe like a friend of his lent him a few books that were like, they were a little bit hammed up to make it just seem like a very interesting history book instead of like dates and what happened. So he was writing off of those a lot. So I think he's definitely like accurate in some ways. And then of course we need to allow fiction to be a bit of an embellishment, but there was a bit of inaccuracy too.
Thank you. Sure. And so we have some characters that he has developed for us. And through those characters, he tells this phenomenal and heartbreaking story. And we're going to ask Miss Sophia to read a section from Book 2, Chapter 16, Still Knitting. And this is a scene between the married couple, the Defarges. So, Sophia, if you would please refresh our memory.
Well then, said Defarge, as if a thought were wrung out of his breast, it is a long time. It is a long time, repeated his wife. Is it not a long time? Vengeance and retribution require a long time. It is the rule. It does not take a long time to strike a man with lightning, said Defarge. How long, demanded Madame composedly, does it take to make and store the lightning? Tell me. Defarge raised his head thoughtfully, as if there were something in that too. It does not take a long time, said Madame, for an earthquake to swallow a town. Ah, well, tell me how long it takes to prepare the earthquake. A long time, I suppose, said Defarge. But when it is ready, it takes place and grinds to pieces everything before it. In the meantime, it is always preparing, though it is not seen or heard. That is your consolation. Keep it.
Thank you, Sophia. I get chills when I read or hear that. I mean, it's beautiful writing. It only takes a moment for lightning to strike and destroy, but how long to build and store the lightning? Who can explain this metaphor? What are the Defarges talking about, Sophia?
So basically in the story, they were like the head of the revolution in their town there. And so Madame Defarge's husband is kind of like losing strength a little bit and is like, this is taking so long. Like, is it really worth it? Like, nothing's going to change. And so she's basically trying to inspire him by telling him, look, like, nothing is going to happen right now, but every little effort that we give, it's putting this into the making of the lightning. And someday the lightning, and it's going to come really hard.
Right. Did it? In the French Revolution? Who wants to talk about that? What was the lightning-ish kind of that, or the earthquake, that period of time? Amelia.
I would definitely say it was the Reign of Terror, which was like a period of like 18 months to 3 years where 50,000 or more people were killed. And it was just like a very quick purge of the country, of basically all aristocracy, everybody who's suspected of being like a royalist still to some degree, and then just like everyone that you could possibly find that would have any connection to being a rebel against the rebels, basically.
Right. Good. Salem, anything else to add?
Yeah, it's kind of like it was a very chaotic strike back because so many people died who were definitely originally opposed to the government, but those who were also a part of the revolution, in the end, a lot of those leaders ended up dying too. So it's kind of like, where is this justice in the French Revolution? Like, it almost seemed like it was lost in the flurry of murders.
It sure does. Yeah, well said. Bryn?
Yeah, during the Reign of Terror, I just have a quote. I think it's from Maximilian Robespierre. And I think he said, for peace to happen, all Republicans must be killed. And then another like main objective of theirs was just to kill everyone who was like, even just like moderate. Like even if they weren't extremists in the revolution, they should be killed. And so I just thought that was, yeah, interesting.
It's shocking. It's shocking to read what the leaders, and Robespierre, of course, being the main leader of the Reign of Terror. Terror is the order of the day. It's the only thing that's going to work, he thought. Jack?
It seems to me that with the initial purge of the aristocracy and how that soon became very brutal, it's rather a mixture of the built-up resentment against people like the Marquis and his actions, mixed with a lot of mob mentality, I would say. So the people of France have great anger against the aristocracy. And then once they start hard acting in this way, it's hard to stop. And then once officials like Robespierre took power, that, like a lot of people have said, it seems that power just starts to corrupt them, and essentially the entire situation descended into paranoia against anyone who could be counter-revolutionary.
Great comment there. And one of the writers for the French Revolution, if you recall, we discussed this. He said that the parents of the revolution or the revolution will eat its own children. And that's what ended up happening, wasn't it? So basically this attempt to justice sort of turned in on itself. Now, here's the big question. This is probably where we'll need to end for today, but this is why it matters. What's the Christian approach to justice and vengeance? We know that Defarge, as an example, suffered greatly at the hands of the aristocracy. It wounded her for life. It sort of set her tone. But how do we approach this as Christians? I mean, we started talking about how God frees the prisoners. He is the judge of all. What do we do? Well, how do we think about this? Was it okay what the people in France did? Emma?
Yeah, I think first, excuse me, I think first we do need to understand that God isn't against war or battles or things like that. Like in the Bible, I can't remember the reference of it, but there's a verse that says there's a time for war and a time for peace. And so just because like peace is definitely what we all strive for and what we want, that doesn't mean that sometimes war isn't necessary. And so I do think it's important. I don't think all war is good. I think there's definitely a lot of war that didn't need to happen. But I do think that some war is necessary in order for peace to be a result.
Nice comment, Emma. Thank you. As hard as it might be to admit that war is a reality, it's certainly okay. Good. I see Salem, then Sophia, then Amelia, please.
I think that the French had a really strong taste for justice, and while they were probably correct that justice needed to be served, I don't think that they were acting like Jesus in the way that they asked for justice. And I pulled up a Bible verse, Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. I think everybody can agree without a doubt that most of the French were acting justly, but they did not love mercy. And I think that they were so fed up with having to be forced to be humble that they swung in the completely opposite direction and kind of fell for the pride of their suffering for so long, that they were prideful. So I think that hand in hand with justice need to be mercy and humility, because I would hate it if I got all the justice for my sins. So I'm very glad that our God is a merciful God.
Absolutely. Amen to that, Salem. Sophia.
I definitely agree with what Salem was saying about how the end that they were striving for was probably a good ideal, but the means that they did it by wasn't necessarily the best idea. And I also wanted to bring up something from scripture. I don't have the exact verse, but he's talking about, instead of eye for an eye, which was at that time the popular how they lived their life, he said rather, like Jesus that is, said, if someone like slaps you, turn the other cheek and let them slap the other cheek. And so obviously, like, the French revolutionists were really hurt by the aristocrats. Their families were killed, their lives completely destroyed. So obviously it's hard for us to judge and say they shouldn't have done this, they should have acted like this, because if we were in their shoes, it would be really tough to, act mercy and kindness. But Jesus did say to love your enemies, and so no matter like what was going on, the correct response would have been to patiently persevere, to try to change lovingly and with mercy and respect, humility, instead of just going and killing all these people.
Wow, great comment, Sophia. Amelia, I think you had the last word today.
I so I don't know the verse, but it's like, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And for the French Revolution, it was a godless revolt. Like, they basically did away with God and religion. It wasn't just the Catholic Church, it was like every Christian thing. And so when God says, vengeance is mine, I think he says that for the reason that we see in the French Revolution, because the French revolutionaries take vengeance for themselves. Like, that's their thing. Is, I mean, Defarge's like right-hand lady is called vengeance. So they're taking vengeance on the aristocrats. But what does it turn into? It turns into like breaking a ton of commandments, and like the New Testament law of love is not in their hearts. So they're claiming vengeance for themselves, which leads to like ungodliness. It's not their place to exact this vengeance, and it just leads to massive like bloodletting on all sides.
Sad but true, Amelia, you're right. And, I'm going to just harken back to what Salem said about thank God for his son who paid the price of all of our sins. What Jesus did was not just, he did it for us. And that is, I think, a lifetime of study and prayer and discipline and God's grace and mercy to help us understand that, because it can be so easy to think we can take justice into our own hands. But in any case, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And I'm so happy to share that journey with you, students. I think you have demonstrated why I love teaching with Scholé so much. I mean, just thank you so much for this inspiring time together, and for spending this little afternoon with us. And I just applaud you and commend you for all your hard work, and I really appreciate you. Thank you. And that's all we have.
Thank you, students, for joining us, and thank you, Mrs. Shaltanis, for the demonstration. I do want to open it up now for Q&A. So parents, and maybe we have older students who are interested in Scholé Academy that are in the audience. Again, you can put your questions, and some of our students are going to drop off because they have to go on with their afternoon. So if you're leaving, thank you so much, but you are welcome to stay if you'd like. You can put your questions in the chat box, or you can also use the Q&A, and we can respond to those questions there. One of the pieces, I'll just say one thing, is perhaps you're thinking about what you've just listened to and kind of thinking about some questions. A couple things. While the classroom experience was going on, I did put some links in there to the class. Someone had some questions about reading list, book list, so I've provided that information. As you can see in our upper school classes, we do talk about certainly very important topics as it relates to history, as it relates to man, humanity, and our relationship to God. And so one of the critical pieces, I think, about why our program is so good at Scholé Academy, if you're on our website, and I'm going to share the link here in just a minute, it's called our Faith and Culture page. This is an important piece, especially for classes that are grades 7 to 12, like the one that you're seeing today, but certainly even into our middle school, our logic classes. But we don't shy away from healthy debate, or we don't shy away from talking about important issues, big issues throughout history. And we saw some of that today. And so I'm grateful that we had that opportunity, because that is a part of our classes in terms of what we mean when we say active reading. Our classes, even all the way down into the lower school, like Phaedra was talking about at the start, they are reading courses. Our upper school classes take a lot from Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book, thinking about those active reading skills. And you can see when our teachers focus on those skills over time, as a child goes through the program and they are in their high school years, then they enjoy rich conversations because they've had time to read deeply, commonplace even, and reflect and think on what they're reading and bringing that into conversation. And then from conversation that can transform into, well-written works, whether that's specific to this class or even integrating it into their writing assignments in other classes. So again, that faith and culture page is great. It speaks to how we tackle history and modernity, and how students will bring really important questions into the classroom, and how they're guided by our instructors. And then just the importance of active reading and discussion. So great, I see some questions coming in. Question, what does homework look like in upper school humanities? So Phaedra, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Reading is first and foremost. We read, I can't say every night, but we kind of stagger as far as the amount that we want to accomplish for a given text. So reading, and then as far as my courses and others, every instructor might have a different activity, but we use dialectical notes, which are just focusing on quotes and then responding to them in a notebook. This is maybe similar to a reading journal of some sort. Commonplace books are great. So there will be a given amount of pages between our classes so Tuesday, Thursday, I'll give one assignment. Then there's usually a response, either a contemplation or dialectical notes, or just even response questions. What do you think about Madame Defarge's quote regarding the earthquake? And then those students get to decide how much time they want to spend on those assignments. I've had everywhere from, 1 paragraph response to 6 pages response on the same assignment from different students, which is really great. It's wonderful, because that's kind of what we want to foster. So I think that it's a fair amount. It's again, struggling or trying to achieve that rigor, but rest. It's a constant effort.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you brought that up, because before we go on to the next question, there is always that question about, well, what do you mean by restful learning, and how do you have that balance? And in terms of restful learning at Scholé Academy, we talk about contemplative learning. So specific to these courses, active reading, engaging with the text, note-taking, rereading, having discussions in class. So in terms of restful, we want our parents to understand that that's what we mean. It's about contemplative learning, having time to dive deep into the things that are most important. You're still going to have the rigor. You're still going to have struggles as students. Sometimes there could be difficult reading passages. There could be questions that we don't fully understand and arrive at an answer. But again, that's all a part of the process of rich discussion and seeking truth. So I do think it's important to clarify what we mean when we say restful learning. And another way also to respond to the homework is, again, this is on average, and like Phaedra was saying, every student is different. Their learning styles are different and their needs are different. But for the courses we're talking about, they meet twice a week, 75-minute sessions. And I would say on average, on their off days, they're spending 45 minutes perhaps on their class, whether that's reading outside of class, or maybe it's working on a written assignment. And yes, that's going to be less for some, more for other students. But it is important that our families know that when the students are not online in their live classes, their off days aren't necessarily meant to be like away from school. They should still, as diligent students, create a schedule to where they're going to sit down with their history or with their literature or what have you, and have time carved out, even though it's not a day where they're meeting live for the classroom. We have another great question about some of our students who are early high school students, maybe 9th grade, 14, 15 years old. If they're not ready for the high school classes, can they enroll in middle school classes? And specifically, there was a question, do we have the British Lit in the middle school? So Phaedra, do you want to talk a little bit about our middle school offerings, and maybe how some of those students that are on the borderline, how they might navigate registration and placement assessments?
Sure. We do have a middle school Reformation, Middle Ages, and Renaissance course, not specifically Western the course I was demonstrating today is British literature and then Western history, Enlightenment to industrial age. So middle school is not quite as specific to that time period, but the main difference I would say is in the skill set as far as the scholarship and what we would expect from the younger students versus the older students. Certainly reading texts like the Song of Roland or Le Morte d'Arthur, those are hard texts, and we wouldn't expect a middle school student to jump right in and master it right away. So the middle school will see some of these texts and get accustomed to these ideas. And then hopefully the plan is that they will revisit a few years later in high school, and then they'll have a foundation and then can apply their further skills and their knowledge to, a more in-depth study. I think I addressed everything you asked. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, go ahead.
The question was, are they allowed, is a ninth grader allowed to take a middle school course? Do you want to respond to that, Joanne? As far as
Sure. We're kind of touching on a couple questions that are asking somewhat of the same question, but I did put a link in the chat box that takes you to our curriculum map. I think I can do it. Yeah. So I want to share. Do you all see a curriculum map? Okay, so this is on our all course page. It's a link right at the top. And of course it starts with lower school, but you can start here with 6th grade and just look at the history block and you can see what we recommend. You don't have to necessarily follow this, but obviously, certainly with history, we look at ancient world on into medieval, and then you can see there as 9th graders or 10th graders, depending upon where they are, they can start taking the high school history literature classes. One of the benefits of the program, if they start with us in middle school, they will revisit some of this same works in high school. They might have that opportunity because our high school teachers each year look at our reading list. Phaedra's done an excellent job at talking with our middle and upper school teachers to refine our book list. So the goal is that students in the middle school gain familiarity, not just with specific text, but with this concept of active reading and Socratic discussion. They're developing that. Now, we always have students that come to us in the high school that might have been with our program or another similar program, so they're very comfortable with that format. But we will have new students join us. And we do have a placement process. Our instructors manage that with each family on a case-by-case basis. For a history or literature course, it could just be a parent-teacher-student conference on Zoom to talk about what the child has been reading before or types of writing assignments, reading expectations. The teacher might give some kind of written assessment and ask for the student to complete that. But once a family registers for a course, so purchases a seat, the instructor can see their roster, and we usually start placement assessments the end of the school year through the summer. But at any time, even as parents, you're trying to decide what class do I register for, if your child falls outside of a target grade range, you can reach out by email to one of our instructors and just describe kind of who you are and where your student's been and what you're thinking in terms of, I'd like to consider this course, would you allow? And many times just through basic exchange of information, an instructor can give you an informed decision to say, you know what, it sounds like your 8th grader is ready for this course, or even though you have an older student, I think this middle school course is a better fit for them. So we really encourage that conversation. We see parents as the primary educators because we do work with homeschooling families. So parents, you are the headmaster, the director, the principal of your school, and you know your child the best. So we want to get the placements right. And so sometimes we need to have those conversations. There's another question here, just to dive deep, perhaps into the writing component of class. These classes in middle and upper school are reading courses, but there are writing components. So Phaedra, maybe you could describe some of the writing assignments.
Sure. I think most instructors give perhaps one essay a quarter, where we try to put in the formal academic essay, at least get some exposure to writing that. But there is, I believe, a lot of writing in terms of just response questions or contemplating a quote. In history, there might be research projects where perhaps research 4 or 5 different topic and write a small paragraph for each. So I think there's a lot of variety in terms of the writing, but there is generally a written assignment that accompanies every reading assignment. And that's so that we can help the students really learn, again, those critical reading skills and help them practice active focused reading. We also do close reading a lot in classes and just kind of put a quote on the screen, and we can spend 15 to 20 minutes on it. And that in a way is part of the writing process, because it's the pre-writing and it's the discussion that happens. And then they can go on their own and then apply all those thoughts into the written word.
That's great. And I did just want to make an announcement to some of the discussion going on in the chat box. So on February 6th, Monday at 9 a.m., we're going to flip the website, and new courses, updated schedules for 23-24 will be available. So right now, just not to confuse anybody, when you're looking at the website, it's specific to this current academic year, 22-23, but Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, it'll switch and you'll see new course offerings. We do have additional history courses that are coming for our lower school, early 5th, 6th graders, so kind of the middle school boundary as well. And that's what Miss Emily Brigham is noticing. So the Curious Historian, some of you might know, maybe your children have already been taking level A. We're going to be bringing in new courses there as well. So there are a lot of new courses coming, including in our upper school humanities offerings, and in the Canterbury House of Studies. There are going to be in that Anglican and Reformed Protestant tradition additional courses within that history literature vein that you might want to explore as well. So plenty opportunity to find ways to study what we say kind of the core in terms of history units and literature units, but we also have classes that really allow you to dive deep and enrich in some of these content areas. Let's see. We had a question here, a couple questions. So I understand these are block classes, history and lit. We were present for a class about 45 minutes. So yes, the way that things are structured, each class is 60 to 75 minutes, meeting twice a week. There's typically a 15-minute block of rest between the history and the literature, or literature might go first. On occasion, you'll see that an instructor might offer history at one time and literature on another day, but for the most part, the blocks are offered as one right before the other with the 15 minutes. Now, families do not have to purchase the block, so you could do just history or you could do just literature. And that's just the flexibility that we give our families. And I would say most students take the full block. I know there's a question there about, do they do both? Do some, opt out? In my years of teaching the history block, most take it. I usually have one or two that might be kind of an outlier just in literature or just in history. I don't know, Phaedra, what you have seen this year.
Majority take both, and I strongly recommend that for numerous reasons. It's almost like there's an exponential gain in both literature and history when they are taken together. I hope that the students demonstrated that. And it's really neat too to be able to flip back and forth between the history and the literature, and then they synthesize all these ideas, and it's beautiful to watch. So if at all possible, I think that would be a great goal, to have students in both classes, the whole block.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions? I know we are just about out of time, and it's Friday, so I don't want to keep anyone late. I'll kind of make some closing announcements, and if there's any other questions, you can put it in there. And for some reason, if we've missed your question, you can email support at scholeacademy.com. You can also go on our website under About Us and look for the instructor page, and that's where you'll find Phaedra's direct email, so you can reach out to her and ask questions about what you saw today, or any of the classes in our humanities department through our history and literature offerings. And then, like I said, upcoming, we have open house February 7th at 7 a.m. Eastern. We are promoting that online and in our e-newsletter, so you can find a registration link and join us for that as well. And I think that's about it. So Phaedra, any closing comments or?
I do have one. Having homeschooled my own children, I had plenty of moments of feeling overwhelmed and insufficient and inadequate. And that's one of the great and most beautiful things about Scholé is the restful approach. And one thing I've come to just remind myself is we can't get to everything that's beautiful and good in the world. So let's make sure that whatever we give them, our children, is good and beautiful. We won't get to it all. That's okay. There's time. But I think you'll find the good and beautiful and true here at Scholé.
Thank you, Phaedra. Christy, any closing remarks on technology or follow-up that I missed?
I think you covered everything. Thank you.
All right. Well, please look for a follow-up email. If you've registered for this event, you will receive the recording link, whether you're here with us now live or obviously you're going to be watching it later. And we just thank you so much for having an interest in our school. And we look forward to helping you through the enrollment process. Again, new families can start registering Monday, February 13th at 9 a.m. and preview week will start Monday, February 6th at 9 a.m. And you can start to plan and maybe reach out to instructors and kind of forecast what you're going to want to do. So thank you again. Thank you, Phaedra. This was a delight. Thank you, Christy, for your help. We will see everyone later.